Good morning. So we will start with Andy, the first lecture of the day. Please welcome Andy Groarke.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to be invited to the Porto Academy and being invited to speak this morning. I've entitled the talk, Making Sense of Our Times. To illustrate the title of the lecture, I'd just like to talk about this image. This photograph was taken on the 19th of July, 1919, when Sir Edmund Lutyens was captured in a moment of time as he walks away from the unveiling of the Cenotaph, Britain's official war memorial in Whitehall, London. It illustrates a fascinating paradox in the representation of architecture, its presumed tendency to be permanent. In fact, the photograph depicts a temporary plaster and wood structure, commissioned, designed, and erected in only 14 days before the peace celebrations took place in commemoration of the almost 1 million dead of the Empire in World War I. A common misreading of the meaning of this photograph reminds us of the limits of a superficial survey or experience of architecture through its image alone. Its original form was an architectural prototype or model of sorts, speedily designed and made to test an expectant need for commemoration. And yet, despite its manifest temporality, its mere physical presence garnered such public acclaim that it was permanently rebuilt in Portland stone for Remembrance Day in 1920. Its sole purpose was, and remains, to stop forgetting those who laid down their lives in conflict for the sake of others. Its architecture provides a nexus for the vicissitudes of public ritual, the bringing together of people for the mutual benefit and support of one another in order to make sense of a changed world. The monument's capacity to continue to provoke discourse about profound and explicitly humanistic values, consideration of the passing of life over time, and the significance of our individual and collective lives as fleeting participants of this world, is somehow consolidated by the physical and enduring presence of this architecture. The essential physical presence of this monument, both in the ephemeral form of its initial temporary test and ultimately its permanent construction, which is now manifestly resistant to its removal, and its potential in guiding architectural production remain highly poignant to us as a practice. It is reassuring that within such limited means of material language, this ambiguous, abstract, and silent thing still has the power to eloquently imply the unsayable, almost a century after it was first commissioned as an architectural idea. We are interested in the physical capacity of architecture to provoke a shared experience of its presence, an experience that can be shared, discussed, and bring people together in a way that unrealized projects or other representations of architecture cannot. We were interested in how physical properties of architecture can reveal other layers of meaning or relate to other ideas beyond themselves through the realm of experience. And we are interested in the inherent and fundamental tensions physical architecture has with the way it is made. Architecture necessarily clings to a fragile existence in the physical world. It is historically seen as a projection into the future with a fixed purpose and status, yet it can neither be complacent about its realization, the certainty of its use, its meaning, or its duration. Compared with other modes of cultural production, the conception of architecture depends hugely on negotiation, collaboration, and participation, on technical and political permissions, contingent on significant investment of financial and material resources, and is a testament to the complex and coordinated work of many. Architecture is often frustratingly slow to realize and messy to build. Its welcome is not always guaranteed. When, and if it is completed, it is at the mercy of time, subject to the effects of gravity and the environment, use and misuse, interpretation and reinterpretation, decay and repair, demolition and perhaps reconstruction. These seemingly unassailable criteria, which may appear to conspire against architecture and threaten its integrity, are where we must find opportunity to give its qualities in critical discourse and its craft of its creation. Our experience in working on a highly unusual range of projects, some with extremely short or some with extremely long intended lifespans, has enforced us to intervene directly with the making of architecture in a heightened way, that perhaps conventional architectural commissions, which organise design and construction as distinct and separate activities, would not normally allow. Making architecture surpasses the image of architectural idea, of an architectural idea, and gives significance to overlapping discourse in its translation into material form. This has given materials and the way that they are worked a far more fundamental status in the expression of what projects can say or do, as well as an explicit awareness and direct relevance to purpose, programmatic and technical requirements. The significance of materials is elevated beyond their objective formal results to the subjective consequences and insinuations, revealing the potential that projects may have to affect perception, behavior, and how users interact with them. So, what I'd like to talk about today is, in the context of a young studio's experiences, how the issue of time, the issue of short-lasting, long-lasting work is mutually supports one another, and that the works are kind of tests of architectural ideas. So the projects begin with some of the temporary projects, and the intention is to reveal some of the themes that are embedded in these early experiments that become gradually invested in some of the work that is being built as more long-lasting or permanent architecture. I'd like to begin with the first project, which is a collaboration with sculptor Anthony Gormley. It's one of the first projects we did. We claim no artistic, conceptual authority over this work. We collaborate with artists a lot. We see that artists have a very, very distinct and acute way of perceiving things, and we find it complementary to our way of working as architects. This is a pavilion as part of a major retrospective of Anthony's work, and it's a glass pavilion which we were invited to collaborate and be architects for, to contain the medium of a dense fog, and what the membrane of the glass really is the container of the fog and the container of the experience. And the idea is the visitor walks into the fog and loses all senses of Cartesian coordinates of space. The fog is lit with 4 times daylight. And so the viewer, the participant becomes highly disorientated, and in so doing becomes a lot more acutely aware of one's body in space, one's interaction with others in the space becomes more acutely aware, and even those that are viewing onto the pavilion itself are aware of the singular and the collective experience of this work. We found this quite a profound theme for many of the projects, this idea that architectural experience is for the one and the many. Many of you will be familiar with this image. As Londoners, it's indelibly imprinted onto our consciousness. It is, of course, the bombings of the 7th of July, terrorist bombings, 2005. The collective public consciousness of this event is really, really established in images such as this. They cannot be kind of removed from public consciousness. And yet, by an act of Parliament, it was decided that it was important to provide not only the memorialization, to keep the memory of this event alive in its reproduction of images, but to create a physical place of remembrance where people could come as singular visitors or collective visitors and somehow recall, remember, make sense of those catastrophic events in 2005. This was really quite a profound experience, a very unusual experience as architects. I guess this plaque, which shows us the 52 the 52 innocent victims of the bombings, reveals a very unusual client list, if you like. We realized quite soon that this list of names, the bereaved families who we were working on behalf of, were incredibly reluctant to be our clients, and it gave us a very distinct and acute perspective on what it is to be an architect, and what it is to work on behalf of a client, what one achieves, how one works with a client to realize a project. This is a reluctant client. They never wanted to be our client. We won the project in competition. I'm so sorry, this slide is very bleached out. This is Hyde Park. I won't dwell on this too much. I don't know whether anyone can see that the park has crisscrossing paths, and our memorial is kind of on the eastern edge of Hyde Park, where we began the conversation about how to design the memorial. We began with a very architectural process about people, place, and purpose. We located it in a context. And then we discussed the identity of this project, this piece of architecture that sort of didn't have any of the normal tenets of architecture. It provided no shelter, but it did provide the important kind of significance of a public place. The issue of representation in this piece of architecture was difficult. We couldn't use the normal figuration of memorials that particularly the British are so good at. The memorial could have none of the figuration, the pathos, the heroicism of a war memorial to celebrate the physical, to commemorate the physical act of war. Neither could it kind of somehow commemorate the effects of a natural disaster. It was somehow something quite different. And once again, this notion about the singular and the collective experience became present in the representation of the architectural idea, the singular life lost and the collective effect on the group of these people. You know, it could have been any one of us within society, but the impact on the significance of this number on society as a whole. So very, very quickly, the significance of the one and the many, a single life lost being represented by a single element became important. A single life, the elements arranged in 4 clusters, 4 locations, and then somehow a collective sense of a whole event somehow had to be communicated as well. Whoops, excuse me, whoops. And that somehow the significance of how these elements were organized could somehow give a interpretation, not an instructive meaning to the memorial. So when one visited the memorial, the elements were arranged in a plan cluster which one could meander in between and ponder the significance. This is a completed shot of the memorial. And the meaning and the making of this memorial became incredibly important with dealing with such kind of few parts, so with having such few elements to reveal the signals of the message of this memorial. We consulted with Anthony Gormley again on the craft of its making. We've built several studios for the sculptor now, and he remains a really important and valued collaborator with the practice. We cast the memorial in stainless steel, one of the hardest kind of man-made materials available to us to make this adamantine, this element that basically had to, its reason for being was to stand the test of time, and that it had to have as much chance of survival over time as possible. So, but we didn't want stainless steel to be used in a commercial way, to register those signals, those subliminal signals of what you normally think of stainless steel and commercial city architecture. We wanted a more archaic registration of this material, so we cast it in an open cast foundry. 1 ton of stainless steel took 20 seconds to pour at 1600 degrees centigrade. It fixed its form within 6 seconds and took 24 hours to cool. In one explosive instant, the memorial took its form in 52 ways. The pattern of the memorial was made in wood a single time and pressed into sand 52 times. So the singular makes the collective. The memorial was arranged in a cluster of 4 interlinked clusters, which one processed through and came to a plaque which was rested slightly at an angle on the berm at the end. As one walked through the memorial, one registered some bare, raw facts: the date, the time, the instant of the bomb, and the location of the bomb. No more facts than that. The visitor is left to ponder the meaning of the memorial. The fonts were designed with a lettering artist, Phil Baines, who went back to the early London transport fonts to really investigate how these letters could be indelibly cast into the surface of the memorial and somehow give a cultural significance to the way letters are fixed in the form, meaning in the making. Here we see some quite incredible volatile effects of the casting process. So this form is sort of almost archaeological, and you get these kind of very unusual surfaces that magnetically compel you to go and kind of touch its surface. It's ambiguous. It compels you to go and investigate, which is kind of exactly what was intended. The memorial has a number of different significances which we find really interesting. After we've handed the project over, it's used and misused, interpreted and misinterpreted in lots of different ways. It's used for kind of collective national commemorations. It's even been tagged with graffiti to commemorate the 4 additional people that lost their lives on that day, the perpetrators of the bombs. We find that very, very interesting, that those cultural registrations are part of the message of this piece of work, and that you know, it gains its significance from people coming to the place and collectively trying to make sense of events. And what you know, we learned 2 things about this, that it was about the physical evidence of this place that brought people together to make this part of their reconciliation, but also with the, you know, it means as much to the everyday Londoner visiting. So the presence of the living amongst the presence of those things that represent the dead completes the message of the memorial. This memorial could not survive without that activation, and we quickly realized through the process that actually our client was beyond the 52 bereaved families who we were working on behalf of. It was actually working on society as a whole for generations to come. From the very, very long-lasting to the very fleeting, this is probably our fastest project we've ever completed. It's an 800 square meter pavilion on the top of an incomplete car park, overlooking the 2012 Olympic site. From first briefing to opening night, this was a 10-week project. The form of the pavilion was regarding some of these kind of monuments, and took a simple notion of a sequence of interlinked rooms with views that resisted the client's first briefing to rent a wedding marquee, and for us as architects to style and dress a wedding marquee. We wanted to create a more vivid and more charged experience of several experiences of being on top of this site. So we started to have a dialogue with the client about more encapsulated episodes of this view. And somehow that was the main architectural idea, and come what may, we would build an experience out of, as it was, temporary works, scaffolding and scaffolding boards, to just reveal that spatial idea. And that as a dining room, the reason for the pavilion, we began with the experience of dining, with a space within a space that really encapsulated two different experiences over the course of an evening at this dining pavilion. So these are the dining rooms with single tables facing the rooms, coming together in this kind of hall. This is the kind of the service, the toilets, the restaurant, and all of these dining rooms had individual and special views. And then the architectural form was wrapped as a kind of umbrella over this series of rooms with a view. We had to be strategic about what was important to the project. So, you know, with an incredibly low budget and a project that had to be dismantled and returned, every gram of the project was returned to the building site afterwards. We felt that the spatial strategy had to kind of outweigh the constructive kind of perfection of the scheme. And it was about the atmosphere and enjoyment of being in a kind of timber-lined dining room, but had the kind of collective sense of being with others. And these rooms were related to distinct views. The next project I'm going to talk about is a project that tests an urban idea in King's Cross. This is King's Cross Station. This is the Central St Martin's College of Art. This is the Guardian newspaper. And here, a little bit bleached out, is the Regent's Canal. The site, the site is a petrol station. We made this project happen. We took we made a handshake between a promoter and a client off the back of an architectural competition being launched for an advertisement campaign to celebrate how good it would be to live and work in King's Cross. We went with the client to one side and we said, don't run the architectural competition. We'll bring you an idea with a promoter, which is not about advertisement, it's about activation of a site. We want to use this site. It's a defunct petrol station with a brick wall that turned its back to the canal. The petrol station came to the end of its natural life, and we thought the first opportunity would be to kind of remove the brick wall. The promoter was really interested in the notion of the popular culture of kind of signs and symbols, and also kind of this kind of Californian notion of the strip of pop culture as part of the city. We opened a project some weeks after, a temporary project that was only intended to last 3 years, called the filling station. We kept the petrol station canopy. We knocked the brick wall down and changed the location of the changed the location of the wall to the front of the site, thereby protecting an area at the back of the site, creating a public space with fluid movement all the way around it. We indented spaces for taxi drop-offs, and we created this fiberglass screen which was deliberately different to the quality of the brick wall. We wanted a certain permissiveness of this material to give a signal that it was at once protective, but on the other hand, it gave a clue that there was some activity, something behind this, and that there was a permission to enter the site and explore it. Within the site, there was the forecourt was turned into a public space. The kiosk was turned into a diner restaurant, keeping the inherent host architecture stripped back and turning it into a very, very charged, dense dining experience, leaving the space outside facing the canal to really offer a kind of recreational space that somehow invigorated that edge of the canal, and a really nice consequence of the project. It only lasting 3 years, and it's only costing the cost of a billboard campaign. Our original idea was to rehabilitate the canal with a fiberglass wall. The interesting thing is when the brick wall came down and people enjoyed drinking a glass of beer in the sun as the sun went down, this towpath started to get joggers running along it again. This towpath started to get people mooring boats along it again. Just a simple act of changing the location of the wall activated a whole urban condition. This project came to the end of its life in 3 years. And we thought it would be terribly sad to throw it away. We were invited to do a Maggie's Cancer Care Centre. Maggie's is Charles Jenks' wife, who sadly died of cancer, and her nurse in her memory set up the Maggie's Trust, which really provides places of respite and emotional support for people that receive the news that they've just been given about a life-threatening disease, illness. This commission normally goes to some of the friends of Charles Jenks, some kind of really important respected names of architects, Norman Foster, Remkulha, Zaha Hadid, etc., etc. Maggie's came to us and said, we'd like to do a temporary centre. We have very, very little budget. In fact, we have 5% of the normal budget of a Maggie centre. And we said, and we need to open it in 6 months. We accepted the commission. The commission is in the context of a oncology cancer care, clinical cancer care unit in Liverpool on the Wirral. And there's two incredible disparities in this image. The clinical, banal architecture of this clinical care centre, the car park, all of this kind of unplanned, poor urbanism. And then the arable fields of the Wirral landscape. We placed our Maggie Centre by clearing a view to the landscape so that the big idea with such limited means and building so quickly was to really just have a room that regarded a therapeutic view of nature, and that we would be respectful to the established nature around the site and build somehow in and around those more mature trees on the site. So once again, we pushed our way through the bushes from the banal architecture of the car park and oncology unit, and you get this most incredible connection back to nature. We often use this image by Droog of a piece of furniture they designed to sort of use as a kind of metaphor for this project. It's kind of collecting lots of things together and somehow putting a wrap around it and making it coherent as a piece of an idea. And really, our project was, because of its extremely limited budget and time, we had to really think of the ready-made as our kind of architectural idea. Here are the trees that we located the scheme around. Here is the kind of the view to nature. Here is the path to the car park. So trees, gardens, landscape epic view, and landscape pocket gardens became the architectural idea. And we used the wrap of the filling station. We recycled it just as another of the ready-mades. The ramp up to the Maggie Centre was literally made of rock stage material that we salvaged. But a little bit more about the main room with the view. We bought this out of the classified ads of the back pages of the Architect's Journal. It was a pavilion that was used for the 2012 Olympics. It had come to the end of its useful life. There was nowhere else where we could buy a 10-metre wide window for such good value in a ready-made building. We continued that idea and made porta cabins clustered together. We made the porta cabins arranged around the gardens and used a scaffolding structure to hold up the fiberglass wrap of the filling station. We then were given 4,000 linear meters of this Scotia detail that we wrapped the inside of the porta cabins with and made these very, very soft acoustic environments that were transformative of the original porta cabin environments. They felt more like a domestic interior than a kind of site manager's hut. And then the project takes on its life of its own. And the idea is that it can feel like a kind of part of your domestic experience. It doesn't feel like a clinical cancer care centre. There's places for you to be on your own, or there's places to make sense of the horrific news that you've just received around simple things that you recognize as part of your day-to-day experience. This is a kitchen table. These are chairs that we designed that are lightweight, that are, you know, in the spirit of kind of the archetypal cafe chair, the bistro chair, the background chair, the chair you almost don't notice. The funny thing is the inspiration of this chair came from Thone and the Mundus chair. Both of those chairs are 400 euros now. We didn't have that budget. We designed and made a chair out of CNC cut plywood that sort of turns the material kind of labor equation upside down from the same values that inspired Thone to do the bentwood chair. So the Thone chair, 400 euros. We're producing this now for 40 euros. but most importantly, you know, this becomes a very unself-conscious environment that gets nature as kind of part of its kind of composition of life, and that the architecture drops away to the background in this building, and the foreground as those kind of interpersonal relationships and this therapeutic view to nature. Buildings that have an intensive relationship with their context is one of the concurrent themes in the work of the studio. This is Glyndebourne Opera House in Sussex, in the south of England. We were invited to extend the programme of the opera season, the 1,200-seater opera house here, to create a visual arts programme in the landscape with White Cube Gallery, one of the kind of most preeminent contemporary art galleries in the world, I guess, collaborating with some of the kind of most renowned artists in the world at the moment. But the important thing was to kind of extend the opera program into a visual arts program with a building, with a gallery. Now, we thought that the connection of a contemporary art experience to a rather aged and traditional audience would be really quite abrupt. So through quite a lot of testing, we came up with this idea of a very simple notion of a building within a building. The art gallery was encapsulated within another experience, which was part of the promenade of walking around the gardens before taking an opera. The room of the gallery was an archetypal gallery room, and to be honest, you know, expresses very, very received notions of how to create good art gallery space: strong walls, strong floors, good lighting. But it was rather more if you like, the interstitial space, the space in between the outer form of the building and the inner room of the building that became the architectural idea, the identity of this pavilion. If you like, it's the useless spaces that created the identity of the architecture, not the spaces the client wanted as part of the brief. So we worked in very large models, 1:20 model. You know, the temporary art gallery, if you like, is a 1:1 model of a test of an idea, a simple plinth on a sloping landscape, a simple pavilion on top with a promenade around it. 1:20 model, 1:1 model. So, you know, just a simple wooden structure that's sheathed in shimmering polycarbonate to kind of take in the play of light of the West Sussex landscape. And also what became really apparent to us in the testing of this idea is just the relative values of light and dark in the experience. This simple experience of the promenade, the dark space of the promenade, which invites the view outwards, away from the pavilion to the landscape. And that the pavilion takes its place amongst a part of the site that is somehow interested in other kind of typological forms of provisional structures, of those structures that are not kind of quite high opera house. They're more of the kind of temporary garden structures, the provisional structures, those structures that are more part of the landscape, and that this building is somewhere in between those two experiences. The studio is now a kind of tipping point where we're turning 10 years old this year, and some of the more long-lasting, substantive projects are being completed. This is a villa that really takes its clue from that has one simple idea. It's the substantial experience of brick as the predominant material and arranging rooms inside and outside that are made of brick. You get a really visceral sense of the presence of this building inside and outside. Its context is really quite banal. It's an Edwardian suburb in North London. Unremarkable. Excuse me, this pointer is going really fast. And the form of the building really takes its clue from the townscape, taking small elements of gables from the Edwardian architecture, composing a form, and then on the bend of this road, really radiating, fanning out the architecture to take views of the magnificent context of Highgate Wood, and creating a series of room forms that really respect those views of the landscape and organize themselves as a kind of tight cluster to the front as part of the kind of sobriety of the streetscape. So it becomes a composition with the predominant material of brick inside and out. Uncompromisingly so. No copings, no flashings, no lintels, just brick. Just brick. And the main architectural spatial idea was a room that could take in all of this rising elevation of landscape up to Highgate Wood, and had this vast 10-meter high hall that was lined in very rich but simple materials, fumed oak, brick, polished plaster, to culminate in a kind of series of kind of quite conventional domestic rooms, but focus on the experience of the material and the experience of the site presence. This is a project that is for a museum in Manchester. This is a painting in the 1830s of the first passenger railway in the world. Here we have Liverpool. The train chugs towards Manchester. The site is a collection of some of the most important buildings in the world from the Industrial Revolution. This is the first passenger railway station on the first passenger railway in the world. The project is to intervene into that industrial heritage context and create a museum that really extends the Museum of Science and Industry that is already established there, which takes on a number of historic buildings that are in considerable decay after they stop being railway purpose buildings, and really kind of examines the historical significance through a new building, and tries to look at how a campus of exhibition galleries, special exhibition galleries, is integrated into these quite magnificent structures. In the context of the museum, the main entrance is over here. There is a huge commercial development, residential and commercial development of the city. This is a project that's about to happen by Rem Koolhaas called The Factory for a performance arts venue. So our project is sort of really rather modestly bedding into the existing structures of the project. The client's brief at the competition was to rehabilitate this building, the first passenger railway depot in the world, by putting a building in front of it. We thought that was, quite frankly, ridiculous and disrespectful, and that it would be much more relevant to reveal the integrity of this building, this railway structure, and this passenger railway station once again. And we had this notion of really having this tripartite composition of buildings and spaces inside and outside, but at the same time making stronger urban connections across the site of the museum from one part of the city up to the other part of the city. And our concept was really quite simple. Build nothing in front of the building, build under the railway arches, and intensify the experience of being, of seeing this as a kind of simple, magnificent, venerable gable of this building, recovering some of the lost ground levels of the building, recovering some of the industrial archaeology of the under the railway arches, and preserving the passenger railway station. So here's the beginnings of our project, and you can see some kind of white structures here. Yeah, we're doing almost nothing to these buildings. When you think that these are the first railway viaduct arches, some of the first railway viaduct arches ever made, and when you examine these in detail, you realise that they were being kind of they were learning from the construction methodology one to the next as they were building them. So our architectural idea is a kind of revelation of these distinct and separate spaces that were built in quite subtle, nuanced, different ways as they were learning how to build. Our project is really a helping hand to the background of that experience. And here's where part of the viaduct fell down and was replaced in the 1960s with a concrete viaduct. Whoa. And through paper models, we're examining the industrial archaeology of this. These are the concrete beams that were built in the 1970s to carry the railway tracks. We're not being pejorative about the relative value of the concrete 1970s structures with respect to the 1830s brick structures, these pioneering brick structures. We're keeping both. Both are part of the cultural registration of this history. And that our project really just does in concrete, in parts, it just gives helping hands to re-leveling the datum of the earth, digging down a big new space, supporting, buttressing, and creating new rooms that represent this experience. And that there is a ramp to get you down from the lower yard to the hall that we've just been looking at, through to a series of arches that allow you to get into other parts of the 1830s buildings. And once again, the primary idea of the project was to just preserve the integrity of this tripartite composition, to intervene only where absolutely necessary to make a circulation idea, to get people under these railway arches, to make the best possible exposition of heritage, the best possible exhibition of the conservation of these buildings, and to create an urban link across the city that hopefully will connect with the OMA project to through the lower yard space. But to create a series of quite, quite simple, robust, figurative arch spaces. And a simple way of revealing more of this elevation and being modest and appropriate to get into the gallery. This is a project for an artist studios that we're working on in East London on the Regent's Canal. It's a collection of buildings which we've taken different views towards according to the very, very unusual and specific plot that we were given. It's a plot of 5 existing buildings where we've elected to keep the buildings in various ways and almost preserve this rather incongruous site. a cluster of buildings and keep the notion of its granular development. So it's kind of fitting with the urban morphology of the project and accepting some of the banality of the urban condition, and then just creating buildings that have special moments, but remain as background, not foreground buildings to the city. Our big move is to open up a view to the canal and create a space, a courtyard space, for artists to meet and discuss ideas, and that there is a building that becomes a little bit more civic in character, that punctuates the fulcrum of this composition of new and old buildings, and really this kind of new urban form which has no anatomy of a conventional building inside it. It's a stack of 3 simple rooms. It's a cafe with a terrace onto the canal. It's a performance space which needs more space on the first floor, and a gallery space, so that the building gradually steps gently out over the canal and asserts a presence of a kind of a civic building amongst other background warehouse buildings of the city. The artist studios become embedded in some of the refurbished historic warehouses. The last project I want to talk very quickly about is another museum that is coming to completion on site. This is a view of Lake Windermere in the northwest of England, just below the Scottish border. It's one of the most idyllic parts of the country and has a incredible history of the picturesque in arts and literature. It became the playground of the rich industrialists of the northwest, of the big conurbations, Manchester and Liverpool, and these pleasure craft, the steamboats, became one way to enjoy the landscape. Our project positions a new museum as a kind of a settlement on the lake shore of Windermere, a cluster of many buildings rather than a single building, a cluster of buildings around a marina, around a wet dock, a cluster of square buildings with archetypal pitch roof forms. This is one of the competition sketches, and it just has this kind of notion that the building should, although the program was very big, the building should kind of embed itself into its context in a typological way. It should recall buildings that were somehow familiar and yet somehow special in their form and figuration. It's a building that should do really one thing: connect the people, the boats, the stories of Windermere together. So connecting people to water, connecting boats to water, connecting people to boats. The site has an interesting context. It was a working site. So in the face of this very, very picturesque condition of Windermere, this was a working site. It was a gravel extraction plant. This was where the gravels were taken from the lake bed and taken out in a deep trench of water. The deep trench of water was seen as, after the gravel was no longer viable as an industrial plant, the deep trench of water was seen as viable for the first steamboat museum on the site that was built in the 1970s out of a timber frame building. And the wet dock was central to the experience of this museum. This is our proposal, which is being built currently. It keeps a version of the wet dock, of the water coming into the museum as part of the central experience. It then puts buildings, square buildings around the outside, clustering, huddling around this main experience. The main entrance is here. There is a route through these buildings. There is a promenade through the buildings and through the landscape. There's a main exhibition gallery, there's a conservators workshop with an active program of conservation of boats. So the boats are made, repaired, conserved, and the content is made. There is an active working boatyard with a slipway. The slipway extends to some jetties which become a marina for boats to be on water, off water. And the visitor experiences about this promenade through the landscape, between buildings, between landscapes, a walk around the park, culminating in this experience of the wet dock, and then out to the visitor facilities, which are the education rooms, toilets, and cafe. We arranged the spaces with one simple idea, that each building has a central hall or nave and a supporting space, and then a third space, rather like the pavilion at Glyndebourne Opera. We saw the potential of these outside spaces supporting the inside spaces. This was an experience that integrated both. Once again, a competition sketch that examined the formal idea of putting the museum on a podium out of the water, the wet dock experience in the center, the buildings clustering as archetypal industrial forms around the wet dock, and the slipway to the boatyard. And that somehow the experience of walking around these buildings was as important as being inside the buildings themselves. This was a day out in the country. It was a day out in the park landscape, and it was a place which was an opportunity for spaces to connect you more intimately to the experiences of the culture of the place, not only just the boats and their stories, but also the environment, the landscape itself. We are very inspired by looking at the archetypes of industrial architecture. This is one of the Bescher's kind of photo series of examining in industrial forms, and as a series making comparisons between the two. We're also interested in artists like Idris Khan that take a re-registration of those ideas of industrial typologies and overlay them, and almost, once again, use and misuse the readings of those forms to create a kind of new reading of a new interpretation of the meaning of those historic forms. So this is a superimposition of all of the forms you've just seen to make a piece, a new interpretation. We think that the form of the building should be somehow embedded into its culture and its landscape, and it should be somehow familiar in its forms, but different. And we just adjust the figurative nature of these forms to make special spaces inside and outside of the building, which becomes important to the physiognomy, the faces of the building, and that really this is a building with no front or back. It's a dynamic experience of landing at the museum from land or water, and that these kind of additional spaces inside and outside the building become extremely important to the figure of the building, but the experience of the building, such that, and this is a drawing once again of the sort of the central nave that of each of the spaces orientates the experience of the boats to water, the supporting spaces, and then these external canopy spaces, and just playing with being quite strict with the language of those quite simple things. We get the physiognomy of an entrance building. We get the conservators' workshop almost kissing the form of the building that becomes the main exhibition hall. We get the building that frames the view to the jetty where you can take a public boat, and that overhangs a river. So we're embedding part of an unusual, a special context as part of that experience, all as one. the building's coming out of the ground in its skeletal form and really orientating very, very basic, simple spatial experiences towards water. The material, the predominant material, the experience of the substance of the building then becomes incredibly important. This is an extremely aggressive environment where weather takes its toll on pretty much everything. We thought that that was a very interesting thing to take on as a material clue that could somehow register its environment, its wear and tear, its use and misuse, its effect over time. And this has started to kind of inspire, you know, a very rusticated attitude towards the concrete podiums that the museum is kind of planted upon. These are the river gravels that have been extracted from the lake bed that are deliberately brought to the surface of the concrete work. We look to the kind of the Nordic architecture, the Finnish architecture of Alvarado, and look to the very unself-conscious use of kind of natural metals, of copper, that have been made in such a way that there's a real economy of means of using a natural metal, and an unself-consciousness and an ease that this material will register the effects of time and use over its lifespan. And that we are somehow taking that on board in the design of our predominant material of the building. This is a natural copper that is made in pieces, that is pinned with brass fixings, so that there is an additional patina and I guess encouraged between the brass and the copper, that the pattern of weathering is fundamental to the cultural experience of this project. So this kind of shows a few kind of I guess forensic tests with Arapar metallurgist engineers on the aging of this metal, which will take on different aging depending on different directions of weather. The project is coming out of the ground. Boats are being conserved, refurbished, put into permanent place. And this is an image we're hopefully going to see something like in about 6 months' time, where, you know, the project really becomes about you know, this idea of registering the passage of time, but connecting people, place, and purpose. Thank you very much.